Welcome to our Tuesday's broadcast of the Gospel Truth. Today I'm continuing to teach on Don't Limit God. I tell you, I love this. This has transformed my life, and I believe that God is touching many people's lives through this. God has more for you than what you've experienced. I believe that without exception. There's not a single one of us that have fulfilled everything that God wants us to do. And I don't care how successful you are, how big of an impact you've made, there's always more. So I've got this book that I wrote on this. I've got 2 little booklets that are freebies. We're asking for a gift of any amount on this. We're giving away these little booklets as free gifts. There's one here on imagination, which is what I'll be talking about today. This one is a brief summary of this entire book on Take the Limits Off God. We've got a static clean sticker, which I really like this. I put this on our mirrors at home, and I just see it constantly. Don't limit God. This is a freebie for you, and we've also got some other things. We'll give out information about that at the end of the program today. Yesterday, I just briefly started sharing out of Genesis chapter 6. This is it's Genesis chapter 11, where the Lord came down to see the Tower of Babel that people were building. And it says here in Genesis chapter 11 and verse 6, the Lord said, "Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do." And so this is a testimony to how powerful unity is. It was because they were one, they were united in one language, and he says nothing that they have imagined will be restrained unto them. And so the Lord confounded their language, divided their languages, and that took away the unity, and it thwarted their plans to build this Tower of Babel. But something that was a challenge to God's plans and purposes for the human race is something that is really powerful. And that's the way that the imagination is. Let me use this verse out of Isaiah chapter 26, verse 3. And if you can receive this truth that I'm sharing right here, this would be a key that would unlock things for you the rest of your life. This is really powerful. It says in Isaiah 26:3, "Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, because he trusteth in thee." And did you know the word that was translated, the Hebrew word that was translated mind right here, is the Hebrew word 𝗟𝗟, Y-E-T-S-E-R, and it means conception. Now that's important. Did you know conception, the stork doesn't bring children, you have to conceive children. This is saying that in your mind is where you conceive peace, and you could go on to say all kinds of other things. And specifically this word Y-E-T-S-E-R that was translated mind here, it was also translated imagination. That's what was used over in many of these different things. Like for instance in Genesis chapter 6, where it says that the Lord saw that the imagination of men's hearts were only evil continually. Did you know that that's that same word? So putting these things together, if mind here is the word that means conception, and it was also translated imagination in other places, what this means is that your imagination is the part of your mind where you conceive things. That is powerful. If you could understand this, it would just transform the way that you receive from God. Everything that you receive from God has to, first of all, be conceived. There are people that are praying for miracles. They're praying for healing. And they're asking God to heal them. But they've never conceived healing. I know most people don't think this way. This is challenging most people's belief, but this is why most people don't see healing manifest. It's because they will pray and ask God to heal them, but they've never seen themselves healed. They've never conceived it in their imagination. You know, I've used this example many times, and so I know some of you have heard it, but it's the best example that I've got, and those who haven't heard it, I think this will really help them. But I heard a story about a man who is a minister. His wife had poor eyesight. She was legally blind, and she had glasses that were as thick as a Coke bottle bottom of a Coke bottle, and even with the glasses, she still couldn't see very well. So she had been trying to believe that God would heal her, but she'd been prayed for so many times that she just was disappointed. She didn't want to be disappointed again. So they had a healing evangelist come to their church, and she avoided him because she didn't want to go through another prayer with no results. But the last night of the meeting, this healing evangelist just cornered her and said, I want to pray for your eyes. So he made her take her glasses off, and then he prayed for her. And after he prayed, he said, now can you see? So she started to open her eyes, and he said, shut your eyes. And she shut her eyes thinking, well, how can I tell if I can see? And he said the second time, now can you see? So she started to open her eyes, and he said, shut your eyes. And she was confused, not understanding what he was doing. Finally, the third time, he says, now can you see? And she started to open her eyes, and he says, I'm not asking you to open your eyes. You've got to see yourself seeing on the inside before you can see it on the outside. He didn't use this terminology, but what he said is you've got in your imagination, you have to see yourself. You have to conceive this healing before you give the birth to it. And so finally she understood what he was saying, and so she kept her eyes closed, and she just prayed in tongues for a while, and finally she says, I can see. I see it. And he says, now open your eyes. And she opened her eyes, and her eyesight was restored. She could see clearly. But see, there's so many people that they just pray for a healing, but they've never seen themselves sick. There are people that have dealt with like food allergies their whole life, and so they see themselves, they think sick, they think this way, they're praying for healing, but have you ever seen yourself like going out and eating something that you couldn't eat before? Have you ever seen it? Most people would say, well, no, because they don't use their imagination like that. We will use our imagination to picture negative things. We've been taught to do that. And like say, for instance, if you've got diabetes or something like that, there are people that have seen themselves having going into a diabetic coma if they don't get the right amount of insulin, if they eat the wrong food. You can see yourself failing. And most of us have gone there in our imagination and have seen failure. But very few people will allow themselves to go there in their imagination and see themselves well. Can you see yourself living without injections? Can you see yourself overcoming the sickness, the disease? See, there's some people that their whole life revolves around their sickness. When they go on a vacation, they take all of their medications. They got to make sure that they've got it all. They've got to make sure that they don't go to certain places when the pollen count is high because they have allergies. And they see this. Their whole life revolves around it. They see it. They think sick. But you've got to start seeing yourself. Use your imagination to see yourself well. And this isn't limited to just physical healing. It's the same thing with prosperity. There's people that see themselves poor. You think poor. You talk poor. You plan poor. If somebody was to say, well, could you ever do, I'd never see myself doing something like that. Well, if you can't see it on the inside, you won't see it on the outside. This is basically what Proverbs chapter 23, verse 7 is saying. It's when it says, as he thinks in his heart, so is he. Did you know the way you think is going to be reproduced in your life? Not necessarily the way you desire. You could be desiring healing, and you could pray for it and long for it, but do you ever see yourself well? Can you see yourself going out and doing certain things? Can you see yourself prospering? Can you see yourself? There's some people that think, well, I just couldn't see myself in a brand new car. Well, then you'll never have it. You got to first of all see it. You can't go anywhere in your body that you haven't already been in your mind. Now you can use that in multiple ways. One of the ways you can use that is if you don't ever think on negative things. If you never see yourself, like if you never get into pornography, if you don't ever watch ungodly movies that portray adultery and fornication, things like that, if you never see yourself committing those things on the inside, then you can't commit it in your physical body. But on the positive side, if you can't see yourself prospering, like say for instance, some of you have a desire to, maybe you have a desire to start your own business. You have a desire to have a ministry. or it could be multiple things. And you have the desire, and you may pray for it, but have you ever seen it happening? Did you know I knew that God told me someday I would go on television because He had planted in my heart a vision that I would reach people all over the world. And television is just a great way of reaching out and reaching large numbers of people. So I knew that someday I would go on television. I had people offer me free airtime on television. But did you know what? I just knew it wasn't time. And for a period of time, it wasn't the appropriate time for me. But I could never see myself doing it. And so I never did it. But then in the summer of 1998, I could spend a lot of time talking about how this happened. But all of a sudden, I just knew it was time for me to start making plans to go on television. And when I saw that, I immediately sat down and started designing what the set would look like. I started thinking, and at that time, I didn't know a single television minister that didn't tape like a service in a church service, and they were wearing a three-piece suit. They were standing up in front of a church and ministering. And that's all I'd ever seen. But when the Lord spoke to me about going on television, I just saw myself sitting here, just like I'm doing right now, with one camera, talking to people. And I saw it. And I literally got so excited that for nearly a week, I never slept more than just a couple of hours at a time because I was drawing and trying to imagine and picture what this set would look like. And it has changed some, but it's basically the same thing. It's what I call rustic elegance. You know, the people that designed this set that's behind me, they came to my house and they saw how I lived, and then they started asking questions, and I said, here's the way I want it to be. And they're the ones that I told them, I said, I want it to be rustic, but I want it to be rustic elegance. In other words, I want it to be wood and stone and have kind of a Western look to it because that's the way I am. It's the way I dress. I wear boots all the time. That's not to say that it's better than anybody else or others are better than me. It's just that's who I am. And I saw this and I drew it. And now you can see it with your physical eyes, but I saw it in my heart. You know what? That was my imagination. I conceived all of this. I conceived the way that this program would go, that I would just be sitting here and talking to people, that I wouldn't be screaming and yelling and have a handkerchief wiping my sweaty brow and saying, glory to God. That was basically the image that I had seen, and I just knew that's not what I am. You know, I'm just not a flashy person. I don't scream and yell when I'm ministering stuff, and some people don't like that. There's other people that do like it. I'm not criticizing anybody else, but I just saw all of these things. Everything that you're seeing now, I saw on the inside of me. Did you know we now have $150 million worth of buildings and property and assets, and it's all debt-free? And I saw all of it. When we got ready to start building, I sat down with some architects and I saw it. I knew for a couple of years that I was going to have to start building and doing some things, and I prayed about it for a long time. And I remember one time when I was in Germany, I saw a building that our building isn't exactly like that, but it's similar. And when I saw it, I said, this is what I want. This is what I like. And I saw it. And then when I came back and I sat down with the architects, I drew on a napkin what I wanted our first building to look like. And I drew these wooden beams. And we have these wooden beams that are 90,000 pounds each. There's 7 of them. And they are for sure the largest wooden beams in the state of Colorado. And my builder said in the United States. I don't know that that's true. That seems a little too much. But anyway, they are huge wooden beams. And you know what? I drew this. And I said, this is what I want this to look like. I drew the clear story. And I drew all of these things. I had seen them. I had prayed about it. And this is what I saw in my heart. I conceived it, is what this said. That the Lord will keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed upon him. And the word for mind there in the Hebrew is the word that means conception. And it was translated imagination different times in the Bible. Your imagination is how you conceive things. And you know what? You can now come and see those buildings. You can see all of these things. We have I think it's 775,000 square feet of buildings, and we are in the process of building millions of square feet of buildings. And I haven't seen it all yet, but I have seen our dorms. I've already got some of those coming up. We've got a student activity center that's going to be coming, and I've sat down with the architects. And I remember talking to these architects for a year and a half and drawing out these beams and talking about different things. And we actually had been a year and a half into the process. I had spent over $1 million in architect's fees. And it was probably closer to $1.5 million. And when they finally got it all together so that you could have built the buildings, is when I said, how much is this going to cost? And I don't know about you, but for me, that was a major step of faith. In the past, everything that God ever called me to do, the first thing I'd do is pull out my wallet and, oh God, I've only got this much money. How can I do this? And I would limit what God could do by looking at my own resources and what I had. When it came to these new buildings that we were building for our Bible school, the Lord told me, don't limit me by you looking at your own wallet. And so I just built what I wanted. You know what? We got a lot of rock. We've got in between all of the ceiling is wood panels, and in between each one are these little black strips, and they're sound attenuating things that cause the acoustics in these buildings to just be perfect. Did you know we could have built it much cheaper than that? But I didn't look and think, how cheap can I build it? Again, see, this is the way that most people think, especially Christians. Christians think that if we are going to do it, we got to do it the cheapest way possible and stuff like that. You'll have ministers come up and say, you know, I'm a minister, could you give me a discount? Man, I hate that kind of thing. You know what that is? That's poverty speaking. That's people thinking that, well, if you're a Christian, you can't pay retail. You know, you're just poor and you're going to have people give you discounts. That's a mindset. That's a way of thinking. That is an imagination. And there's some of you that you just see yourself poor. You will sit there and talk about those rich folks over there. And by the very fact that you say those are rich folks over there, you have distanced yourself from it. You are identifying, you have an image on the inside of you that you are just poor. You can't see yourself prospering. You know, there's many, many times, this doesn't happen just all at once. There's many different stages. But I remember one time going out with a man who was my media buyer, and this guy was very well off. I mean, he was rich, way beyond where I am. And we went out and played at a really fancy golf course, and at the end we had caddies. You had to have a caddy. This was one of those highfalutin golf courses. And so at the end, the caddy was cleaning our clubs, and it was obvious they were waiting on us to give them a tip. And so anyway, I went over to him and I said, Doug, do you have change for a 20? I was going to give, you know, my caddy a $5 tip. And he just looked at me. He didn't say anything, but he was thinking differently, see, than I was. And he said, I'll take care of it. And he went over and gave every one of the caddies a $20 tip. And it made me feel about that big. But it revealed to me that, see, I had an image on the inside. I had a $5 tip faith. This other guy who was a multimillionaire had a $20 tip faith. And not long after that, I was out to play with a group of pastors, and one of them came up to me and says, hey, do you have change for a 20 so I can give a tip to the caddy? And man, I was really thrilled to say, I'll take care of it. And I went around and gave every one of the caddies a $20 tip. You know, I've changed my way of thinking. I've actually had waitresses before that came, and I was witnessing to them, and I'll just give them a $50 or $100 tip when the bill's only $20 or $30. And it just shocks them, but man, that's cheap to be able to witness to people. I've changed the way that I look at things. You've got to be able to see yourself prosperous on the inside before you will see it on the outside. You've got to see things. You conceive things in your imagination. I remember building a deck on my house that I had out in Florissant, Colorado, and it was just dirt. What I did was take a 5-gallon bucket and I turned it upside down, and I just sat on that bucket, and I spent hours just sitting there staring. My wife came out and said, "What are you doing?" Well, in my mind, I was picturing how I wanted that deck to look. It actually had 4 different levels on it. And I pictured the railing, how I wanted the railing to look, whether the slats in it were horizontal or vertical. And I just sat there for hours and pictured things. And then I pictured the braces that were underneath and how I would level things out. And I had to see it on the inside before I could build it. But eventually I built, and there is a physical deck that reflects what I saw on the inside. I conceived it. This is why we build blueprints. When you go to building something, you say, "I want this room to be, 20 by 30 or whatever it is," and that's one thing. But then to have it done exactly the way you see, you've got to write it down. And that when people can see it, well, then they can go and reproduce it. You've got to see things on the inside before you can see it on the outside. And there are people watching this program right now that you're praying for healing, but you've never seen yourself healed. You're praying for prosperity, but you've never seen prosperity. You're praying that God would use you in some way, but you've never seen yourself being used. You've got a negative image of you being a little grasshopper up against these giants, Numbers chapter 13, and you just can't see yourself doing what you really desire to do in your heart. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm going to say something here that might bother you at first, but if you'd receive it, it could set you free. But your life is today the way you see it being. And I know some people, "That's not true, man. I don't desire this marriage to be this way. I don't desire my finances to be this way. I don't desire my health to be that way." It may not be what you desire, but it is what you've seen. You see yourself. You place limits. Like some people may think, "Well, I've got cancer. I didn't see myself having cancer." But no, you saw yourself as only human. And you saw yourself inferior to cancer. And so when the diagnosis came, you just embraced it because that's what they say. I've had people tell me that I had to go into the hospital and have open heart surgery, but I couldn't see it. And I told them no. And I have never had open heart surgery, and I'm not ever going to have open heart surgery because I couldn't see it. And what you see, as a man thinks in his heart, that's the way that it is. So part of taking the limits off of God is you're going to have to start using your imagination, like it says in Isaiah 26:3, that the Lord will keep you in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed upon Him. That's talking about your imagination. And you have to see yourself prospering. Hello, this is Andrew Wommack, and if you've enjoyed our program there on YouTube, I encourage you to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Share this with other people because, man, these truths will set people free. So check it out, like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.